The city spread out below the penthouse apartment like a glittering, black velvet carpet scattered with diamonds. It was a view that screamed of money and power, and the man standing by the window, a glass of amber whiskey in his hand, felt that power was his by right. He was a man who had built his name from nothing, a titan of finance whose very presence could make stock markets flutter. His whole life was a carefully constructed monument to his own success. For him, his wealth was not just numbers in a bank account. It was his identity, his armor, the thing that made the world respect him. His wife moved through their grand home with a very different kind of grace. Where he was loud and loved to be the center of attention, she was calm and observant. When he walked into a room, he demanded everyone's notice. When she walked in, people naturally felt at ease, drawn in by her warm smile and intelligent eyes. To the people in his world, the bankers, the investors, the deal makers, she was the perfect partner for a man like him. Beautiful, poised, and supportive. They saw her as the final, beautiful piece of his impressive collection, like a priceless painting that completed the room. But they did not know her secret. The truth was, her calmness did not come from a life of luxury provided by her husband. It came from a place of her own immense and quiet achievement. While her husband was making headlines for his bold business moves, she was quietly running a revolution in the world of science. She was a brilliant biologist, a doctor who had dedicated her life to understanding the very code of life itself. Years ago, with a small team and a big idea, she had started her own company. It wasn't a flashy business. It worked in labs with complex data and advanced computers, creating new ways to fight diseases by understanding a person's unique genetic makeup. Her company had grown slowly at first, and then all at once, becoming a giant in the world of biotechnology. She was the mastermind behind it all, the driving force. Yet, in her personal life, she never felt the need to announce this to her husband's friends. She enjoyed the separation. In her world, she was the boss, the genius, the one everyone looked to for answers. She liked coming home and just being his wife, away from the pressures and the spotlight. It was a peaceful, private life she had carved out for herself. Their marriage, in many ways, was happy. They loved each other. But over the years, an unspoken agreement had settled between them. In public, he was the star. He was the provider, the expert, the one whose opinion mattered most when talk turned to money and power. She was happy to play her part, to smile and nod, to let him have his stage. She didn't need the validation from his crowd. She knew her own worth. This particular evening was the biggest night of his social calendar, the annual gala for his company. The penthouse was filled with the most important people in the city. The men were in sharply tailored suits that cost more than most people's cars, and the women wore glittering jewelry that sparkled under the chandeliers. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses mixed with serious conversations about stocks, mergers, and global economics. He was in his element, holding court in the center of the living room, telling a captivated group about his latest and riskiest business acquisition. His voice was loud and confident, filled with the thrill of the deal. He painted a picture of himself as a fearless pirate capturing a treasure ship. His wife moved through the crowd, greeting guests with a genuine warmth. She had just finished a long and exhausting video call with investors from another country, finally securing a staggering amount of money for the next phase of her company's research. She was tired, but happy, carrying a quiet satisfaction inside her. She made her way to her husband's side, slipping her hand gently into his, a silent show of support. The conversation in the group soon turned to the shaky state of the global economy. One of the older investors was worrying about the instability of traditional markets. Listening quietly, his wife saw a natural opening to contribute. She wasn't trying to show off. She simply wanted to share a different, more hopeful perspective. From what we're seeing in the tech bio sector, she began, her voice calm and clear. The foundations are incredibly stable. The growth is driven by long-term research and real-world solutions, not just speculation. It might just be the anchor that steadies the wider market in the coming years. It was a thoughtful, intelligent point, born from her direct experience at the highest level of a booming industry. But her husband, feeling the eyes of his peers on him and buzzing from his own success and the champagne, didn't hear the wisdom in her words. He only saw it as a simple comment from his wife, who was, in his mind, stepping into his area of expertise. He gave a low, patronizing chuckle. He squeezed her hand, but it wasn't a loving gesture. It was a dismissive one. "Darling," he said, his voice dripping with condescending affection, loud enough for the whole group to hear. "That's a charmingly foolish take on high finance." He patted her hand as if she were a child who had just tried to explain a complex puzzle. "This is the big leagues. The numbers we deal with. It's a different world. Leave the complex numbers to the professionals, HMM." A tense, awkward ripple of laughter moved through the people around them. Some of the men chuckled nervously, looking down at their drinks. The women offered his wife weak, sympathetic smiles. His wife did not flinch. Her smile, which had been warm and natural, remained fixed on her face. But it didn't reach her eyes anymore. Her eyes, which had been soft and warm, now hardened. They became like dark, polished stones, reflecting the cold light of the chandeliers. She looked at her husband, not with anger, but with a deep, resolute calm. She had spent years building a silent empire of her own, and in that moment, a single, careless spark from her husband had just lit the fuse. The quiet, peaceful world they had built together was about to change forever. Asterisk, the party flowed on around them, a river of noise and light, but for her, everything had narrowed to a single, sharp point. The hum of conversations became a distant buzz. The bright light seemed to spotlight the space where she stood, frozen for just a second after her husband's words, charmingly foolish. The two words hung in the air between them, much louder than the clinking of glasses or the burst of laughter. She could feel the eyes of the other guest on her, their looks a mix of pity and uncomfortable curiosity. She saw one woman, the wife of a banking executive, give a slight, almost invisible roll of her eyes, as if to say, "Here we go again." Another man looked away quickly, pretending to be very interested in a painting on the wall. Her husband, completely unaware of the storm he had just created, had already turned back to his group. He was re-energized, his chest puffed out a little more. He had established his dominance, shown himself to be the expert, and he had done it in front of an audience. He launched back into his story, his voice even more booming and confident than before. He didn't glance back at his wife. He didn't see the slow, deep breaths she took, or the way her fingers, which had been resting lightly at her side, curled gently into her palm for years. She had played this part. She had smiled through countless dinners where her opinions on politics or art were met with a patient, condescending smile from him, as if she were a student who had given a cute, but incorrect, answer. She had listened to him explain her own field of science to others, getting half the details wrong, while she stayed silent to avoid embarrassing him. She had built a fortress of patience around her heart, brick by brick, telling herself it was easier this way, that his ego needed the feeding, and her own success was her private joy. But this was different. This was not in the privacy of their home. This was a public dismissal. He hadn't just disagreed with her. He had called her foolish in a room full of their peers. Reducing a lifetime of hard work and genius to a silly notion, she didn't make a scene. She didn't storm off. Instead, she did what she had always done. She became the calm in the eye of the hurricane. A serene, unreadable mask settled back over her features. She turned to the group and offered a small, polite smile. "Please, don't let me interrupt," she said, her voice steady and warm, as if she found the whole thing mildly amusing. "You gentlemen continue your very important discussion." She then gracefully excused herself, walking towards the long table filled with food and drinks. She picked up an empty tray that had held canapes and made her way towards the kitchen, looking for all the world like the perfect hostess, checking on the catering. It was a performance, and she was its master. In the kitchen, away from the prying eyes, the head caterer looked at her with concern. "Is everything all right, ma'am? Can I get you anything?" "Everything is fine," she said, her smile genuine for the first time in the last 10 minutes. "The food is wonderful. Thank you." She placed the tray down and took a moment, just a single, quiet moment. In the humming stillness of the kitchen, she looked at the chefs working efficiently, the precise movements, the creation of something real and tangible. It reminded her of her lab. It grounded her. She walked back out into the party, but she did not return to her husband's side. Instead, she began to mingle. She found the young, nervous associate who had been hovering near the edges all night, looking intimidated. She struck up a conversation with him, asking about his work and his family, putting him completely at ease. She moved to a group of women who were discussing a recent charity auction, and she listened. She laughed. She contributed. She was the soul of the party, breathing life into every corner of the room she touched. And all the while, in the back of her mind, a single, clear thought was forming. It was not a thought of anger or revenge. It was a thought of clarity. The fortress of her patience, brick by brick, was crumbling. The unspoken agreement of their marriage that he was the sun and she was the moon, reflecting his light, suddenly felt like a lie she had been telling herself for too long. She watched him from across the room. He was laughing now, a big, booming laugh, slapping one of his business partners on the back. He was so sure of his place in the world, so sure of his power over her, so sure that his money was the foundation upon which their entire life was built. He had no idea that the ground beneath his feet was not solid rock, but a delicate sheet of glass, and she was holding the hammer. The party eventually began to wind down. The goodbyes were long and filled with handshakes and air kisses. Her husband was beaming, receiving congratulations on a wonderful evening. A fantastic party. One guest told him. "You have a beautiful home," said another. He accepted it all as his due, wrapping an arm around his wife's shoulders and pulling her close. "It was all thanks to this one," he said, giving her a squeeze. She leaned into him, smiling up at him, playing the part one last time. Finally, the last guest was gone. The grand front door clicked shut, and a heavy silence fell over the penthouse. The only sounds were the quiet clicks of the caterers cleaning up in the kitchen, and the low hum of the city far below. Her husband let out a satisfied sigh, loosening his tie. He walked to the bar and poured himself a generous glass of whiskey, the ice cubes clinking loudly in the quiet room. He turned to her, his face flushed with triumph and alcohol. "You are magnificent tonight, my dear," he said, his voice warm and full of affection. He truly believed it. He thought her silence, her grace under his condescension, was a sign of her support. He misread her quietness for admiration. She was standing by the massive window again, looking out at the city. She didn't turn around. Her reflection in the glass was calm, but her eyes were focused and sharp. "Why did you call my opinion foolish?" she asked. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear and precise, cutting through the silence like a knife. The fuse was burning, and the explosion was moments away. The quiet question seemed to hang in the air, as real and solid as any of the expensive furniture in the room. For a moment, her husband didn't seem to understand what she had said. He was still floating on the high of his successful party, the warmth of the whiskey in his hand, the feeling of being the king of his castle. He gave a little laugh, a soft, dismissive sound. "Oh, that?" he said, taking a slow sip from his glass. "It's just party talk, my dear. You know how it is. You have to be the expert in the room. No one takes those things seriously." He waved his hand, as if brushing away a tiny, insignificant fly. He truly believed it was nothing. In his world, words were tools to build up your own image. He had used her comment as a stepping stone to make himself look taller, and he assumed she understood that game. She finally turned from the window to face him. The city lights behind her created a halo around her silhouette, but her face was in shadow, her expression unreadable. "I do," she said. Her voice was still calm, but it had a new weight to it. "I take it seriously." This made him pause. He put his glass down on the bar with a soft clink. He could hear something in her voice he wasn't used to, a firm, unshakable resolve. It wasn't the hot, sharp anger he might have expected. This was something colder, stronger, like ice that had been forming for a very long time. "Darling, what is this really about?" he asked, his tone shifting from dismissive to slightly irritated. He walked towards her. "Is this about me interrupting you? Fine, I'm sorry, but you have to understand the pressure I'm under. These people, my investors, they need to see strength. They need to see that I'm in control. When you jump in with your ideas, it complicates things." "My ideas," she repeated, not as a question, but as a statement. She took a step out of the shadows, and the light from a nearby lamp fell across her face. There was no anger there, only a deep, profound sadness. "For 12 years, you have called my career a noble hobby. When I stayed up all night to finish my research, you said I was playing in my lab. When I tried to explain the stress of running a company, you told me it was cute that I had my own little business to keep me busy." He stared at her, his mouth slightly open. He had said these things, yes, but he had never meant them to be hurtful. He had always seen them as terms of endearment, a way of protecting her from the brutal, cutthroat world of real business that he lived in. He thought he was building a comfortable world for her. "That's not fair," he said, his voice rising defensively. "I have always supported you. I've given you everything. This apartment, your car, the clothes on your back. You have never wanted for anything because of me." He spread his arms wide, gesturing to the immense wealth that surrounded them. To him, this was the ultimate proof of his love and support. This was the scorecard of his life, and that was his final, biggest mistake. She looked around the room, at the art, the furniture, the view. Then her gaze returned to him, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something else in her eyes. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was pity. "Is that what you think this is about?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The apartment? The car?" "Of course it is." He shot back, his frustration finally boiling over. He was losing control of the conversation, and he hated it. "This is the real world, Nia, my world. The world of pressure and responsibility. You live in this beautiful, gentle bubble that I have created for you. You couldn't possibly understand the pressure I'm under to maintain all of this, to maintain this life for us." He was almost shouting now. His face was red, He had laid his cards on the table. In his mind, he was the hero, the provider, the one who carried the immense weight of their luxurious world on his shoulders alone. He was so sure of his own story, so convinced of his role, that he was completely blind to the truth standing right in front of him. The room went utterly silent after his outburst. The only sound was the faint, distant siren of a police car many stories below. His wife looked at him for a long, long time. The pity in her eyes was now mixed with a strange, calm certainty. The storm inside her had passed, and a decision had been made. The moment had finally come. "You're right," she said, her voice eerily calm. "I don't understand the pressure you're under to maintain my laboratories. I don't understand the pressure to manage my research teams across 3 different countries. And I certainly don't understand the pressure you feel to sustain the growth of my company, which, for the last 5 years, has been valued higher than your entire investment firm." She didn't say it loudly. She didn't say it with pride or with venom. She said it as if she were stating a simple, boring fact, like the time of day or the weather. Her husband stood perfectly still. He blinked, sure he had misheard. The words made no sense to him. They were like a puzzle, in a language he didn't speak. Her laboratories? Her company? Valued higher? He opened his mouth to say something, to laugh, to tell her she was being ridiculous. But no sound came out. She gave him a small, sad smile. "You are so busy maintaining your world. You never once bothered to learn about mine, then." She turned and walked slowly and steadily towards her private home office, a room he almost never entered. She left him standing there in the middle of their grand living room, surrounded by all the proof of his success, which suddenly felt as substantial as a house of cards. The foundation of his entire world had just been pulled out from under him, and he hadn't even seen it move. He stood frozen in the center of the room, a statue of a man who had just heard the world was flat. The sounds from the kitchen, the final clatter of pans, the running water seemed to come from another universe. Her words echoed in the silent, spacious room, bouncing off the high ceilings and expensive artwork. "My company, valued higher than your entire investment firm." It was impossible. It had to be a joke, a strange, hurtful joke to get back at him for his comments at the party. But her voice had held no humor. It had been flat, factual, like a news report delivering unbelievable news. He heard a drawer open in her office down the hall. The sound was sharp and clear, then the soft tap of fingers on a keyboard. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion. His wife was a scientist. She ran a small lab, a boutique operation. He paid for it, didn't he? Or he thought he did. He realized with a sudden, sickening lurch that he had never actually seen a bill. He had just assumed it was part of their household expenses, another line item in the vast budget of their life. He tried to picture her company. He saw test tubes and people in white coats. He saw her coming home tired, but he always thought it was the gentle tiredness of a hobbyist, not the deep exhaustion of a leader. He thought of the times she was on her phone late at night, speaking in calm, firm tones. He had assumed she was talking to a colleague about some minor problem. Now, those memories took on a new, terrifying shape. His heart was beating a strange, heavy rhythm in his chest. The confidence he had felt just minutes ago, the feeling of being the master of his universe, was draining away, leaving a cold, hollow feeling behind. She walked back into the living room. In her hand, she held a single sheet of paper. She didn't thrust it at him. She didn't throw it. She simply walked over to the large, polished coffee table that sat between them and placed it down gently, as if she were setting the table for dinner. "Perhaps you should look at the real numbers," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the room. He didn't want to move. He wanted to stay in this moment before he knew, in the world where he was still the provider, the king of his castle. But his feet carried him forward, step by slow step, across the expensive rug. His eyes were fixed on that single white piece of paper. It looked so innocent, so simple. It held the power to shatter everything. He reached the table and looked down. It wasn't a complicated document. It was a clean, simple summary. At the top was the name of her company, a name he recognized but had never truly seen. Below it were a few lines: company valuation, annual revenue, founder's equity, and liquid assets. His eyes, trained for decades to read complex financial charts in seconds, scanned the numbers. And then they stopped. They moved back to the beginning and read them again, slowly, one by one. First, there was confusion. His brain could not make the numbers fit with the image he had in his head. The valuation was not that of a small lab. It was a staggering figure, a number he associated with tech giants and industry leaders. Then, disbelief. This had to be a forgery, a fantasy. He looked up at her, his eyes asking a silent question. She just looked back at him, her expression calm and unwavering. He looked down again. His eyes moved to the line that showed her personal liquid assets, the cash and assets she could access immediately. He compared it automatically to the number he knew was in his own accounts. The number he was so proud of. The number that defined him. And that is when the final, crushing wave hit him. Her number was not just a little bigger. It was 3 times larger. 3 times. The air left his lungs in a soft rush. The paper slipped from his suddenly numb fingers and fluttered back onto the coffee table. He felt dizzy. The beautiful, expensive room seemed to tilt and swim around him. The towering, unshakable monument of his own success, which he had spent his entire life building, didn't just crack, it dissolved into dust. Right before his eyes. He was not the wealthy benefactor, generously providing for his wife. He was not the financial genius carrying the weight of their world. In the cold, hard light of these numbers, he was the junior partner. He was the one living in her world, surrounded by her wealth, boasting about his accomplishments while she silently managed an empire that made his look small. The memory of him patting her hand and calling her foolish flashed in his mind. It was the most shameful, humiliating moment of his life. He had been the fool. He had been the one who didn't understand the complex numbers. He had been living in a story he had written for himself, a story that was completely, utterly false. He slowly sank into the plush sofa behind him, his legs unable to hold him up any longer. He didn't look at her. He couldn't. He stared at the floor, at the intricate pattern of the rug his wife had probably paid for. The silence in the room was no longer just an absence of sound. It was a heavy, living thing, filled with the echoes of his own arrogance and the crushing weight of the truth. The armor of his identity was gone, and he was left exposed, naked and completely shattered. Asters for a long time, there was only silence. He sat on the sofa, his body slumped, his eyes fixed on a single point on the floor, as if he had forgotten how to move. The proud, confident man from the party was gone. In his place was a hollowed-out shell, filled with nothing but the echoing sound of his own shame. She did not say anything. She did not gloat. She did not try to explain further. She simply walked to the other side of the room, sat in a chair, and waited. She gave him the space to feel it all, the shock, the disbelief, and finally, the crushing weight of the truth. She knew that any word from her right now would only feel like another stone thrown at a broken window. The first thing that broke inside him was not his pride, but his memory. His mind, without his permission, began to play back 1,000 little moments from their life together. The times she had tried to talk about the stress of her work, and he had nodded absently while thinking about a business deal. The times she had come home late, her shoulders heavy with exhaustion, and he had joked about her little project. The times he had bought her expensive jewelry, believing he was giving her something she could never have on her own, never realizing she could have bought the entire store. Each memory was like a pinprick, and together, they were unbearable. He had not been a bad husband in the ways that are easy to see. He had been loving in his own way, but he had been blind. He had built a cage for her with his own assumptions, and he had never once seen the bars. He finally lifted his head. His eyes were red, but there were no tears. He felt too empty for tears. He looked at his wife, really looked at her for what felt like the first time in years. He saw the quiet strength in her posture. He saw the intelligence in her eyes that he had always mistaken for simple calm. He saw the person she had always been, the person he had been too busy to see. His voice was a dry, cracked whisper. He cleared his throat and tried again. I am so sorry. They were not the polished, easy words of a man trying to smooth things over. They were raw and torn from somewhere deep inside him. They were not just an apology for one night. They were an apology for a decade of blindness. I didn't know, he said, the words feeling weak and useless even as he said them. You never asked, she replied softly. There was no accusation in her tone. It was just another fact. You were always so sure of your own story. You never wanted to read mine. He nodded, accepting this. It was the truest thing anyone had ever said to him. He had been the author, the director, and the star of his own life. And he had cast her in a supporting role without ever checking if that was the part she wanted to play. The following days were strange and quiet. The grand penthouse felt different. It was no longer his trophy. It was simply their home. The things he had seen as symbols of his success now felt like reminders of his ignorance. He moved through the rooms with a new hesitance, like a guest who wasn't sure of the rules. He spent a lot of time alone, thinking. The humiliation was a heavy coat he could not take off. But slowly, underneath the shame, something else began to grow. It was a feeling he had not felt for his wife in a very long time, respect. Not the kind of respect you give a beautiful object, but the deep, humbling respect you have for a true equal, for someone who is, in fact, in many ways, your superior. He started to ask questions, Tentative, awkward questions at first. So, your company, what does it actually do? He listened, truly listened, as she explained the science in simple terms. He asked about her team, her challenges, her victories. He realized her world was not a gentle bubble. It was a complex, high-stakes battlefield of research and innovation. And she was its general. Their marriage entered a new season. It was not an easy, instant fix. The habits of years do not disappear overnight. There were still moments when he would slip into his old, patronizing tone. But now he would catch himself. He would stop, take a breath, and say, "I'm sorry. Please continue." It was a conscious, daily effort to rebuild their partnership on a new foundation, one made of truth and mutual respect, not assumption and ego. Weeks later, they attended another party. It was a smaller, more casual gathering in a friend's home. The conversation, as it often did, turned to business and the economy. One of the men, a boisterous property developer, began talking about the instability of new tech companies, these startups. They're all flash and no foundation, the man said, waving his cigar. It's not real business. The husband felt his wife tense slightly beside him. He saw the man glance at her, a knowing look in his eye, as if expecting her husband to agree with him. In the past, he might have chuckled and joined in, reinforcing his place in the old boys' club. But that man was gone. He put his hand gently on his wife's back. He felt her surprise at the touch. He looked directly at the property developer, his voice calm but firm, carrying a new kind of authority, the authority of someone who finally knew the truth. "You should listen to my wife," he said, and the whole room seemed to quieten just a little. "She's the real financial genius in the family. She understands the future better than any of us." He then turned to her, giving her the floor. "Darling, please, tell them what you were explaining to me about long-term value in the biotech sector." The look she gave him then was worth more than any billion-dollar deal he had ever made. It wasn't a look of triumph or victory. It was a look of deep, heartfelt recognition. It was a look that said, "Finally, you see me." In that moment, they were no longer the billionaire and his wife. They were simply the partners, standing side by side, their silent merger finally and beautifully complete.